this device is actually being experimented on at the Naval Air War Center. And that Payes is working on generating the electromagnetic flux, that is the kind of flux or the microwave being pulsed in this cavity that could generate the quantum vacuum flux. So he's saying, yes, this is real, this is happening. And she goes on, point 3, he says, if successful, the realization of this result demonstrates that this patent documents the future state of the possible and moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamic systems to field-induced propulsion-based hybrid aerospace undersea craft. Right there, you have a shot across the bow of the fossil fuel industry. Moves propulsion technology beyond gas dynamic systems. So this is telling us that turbojets, that kind of rocket propulsion systems, any kind of liquid fuel propulsion system, that's redundant. That generating these electromagnetic fluxes, or these electromagnetic fields, and fluxing them, pulsing them in a certain way, you can actually develop quantum vacuum bubbles. And that this is a form of propulsion that's far more efficient and powerful than anything that can be done by a rocket or kind of like a turbine, turbine jets, or kind of any kind of liquid fuel propulsion system. So this is revolutionary. This is a revolutionary state. And then he says, based on these initial findings, I would assert this will become a reality. Very important statement. This will become a reality. He's telling the patent examiner that you've got to grant this patent because it's going to become a reality. And then he throws in the kicker. China is already investing significantly in this area, and I would prefer we hold the patent as opposed to paying forevermore to use this revolutionary technology. So the Navy is developing these electromagnetic field technologies that can be used for propulsion and can be used for other things like protecting an installation or a ship or a city using electromagnetic fields, and that China is also doing similar work. And if the patent examiner doesn't grant this patent to Payes and to the Navy, that the Navy will be paying a lot of patents, will be paying royalties to the Chinese, who, in all likelihood, basically stole or did industrial espionage to steal these patents from the Navy in the first place. So that's a very powerful argument, and that tells us why the Navy, why the patent was granted to Payes in what was it, December 10 or early December 2018, and why that was done almost simultaneously with the granting of the patent for the high energy electromagnetic field generator that was granted in November, only 2 weeks earlier of 2017. Because the patent examiner or examiners were convinced from the Navy that these patent applications were feasible, and that the Navy needed these to signal to China that the Navy has been developing these technologies, and that China was also developing them, and that if they didn't make them public, that China would come out with their own patents, international patents, and the US companies would be paying royalties to China, because China could have gone forward with patent applications internationally or in the United States. So, this takes me into, exactly what do the Chinese have? I thought I'd just share a little bit about what China has, because it's directly relevant to these patents, because as I mentioned, the US Navy is aware that the Chinese have similar technologies to what the Navy has been developing, and the patent applications are really done to make public or to bring into the white world technologies that were built in the black world 30 to 40 years ago, going back to the 1970s. On November 20, 2019, a newly retired US Air Force General, Stephen Quast, publicly declared that China is building a space navy with battleships and destroyers that could be used against US military assets in space. So in 2019, you actually have people in the Air Force being given the kind of green light to go public and start spilling the beans on the Navy's, on China's secret space program. And it's interesting, the term he used. He didn't say, well, China is developing advanced satellites and spacecraft, moon landers or moon orbiters or kind of orbiters or orbital vehicles for Mars and so forth. He's talking about battleships, quote, battleships and destroyers. So he's telling us that the Chinese have battleships and destroyers out there, or they're working on them. And the subtext of this is that we also have battleships and crew and destroyers out there. And of course, for those of you that have read my books, know that I've been talking about the Navy having battleships and destroyers out in space that were first deployed in the late 1970s and early 1980s. So basically, the Chinese are playing catch up, but this Air Force General is getting us all up to speed that this is what lies ahead for us all. That we are entering into this new world where it's not just going to be a matter of, oh, the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans have, satellites and have moon orbiters and moon landers or Mars orbiters and Mars landers. No, the US, Russia, China, we have space battleships out there, space destroyers out there, space carriers out there. This is what William Tompkins has been telling us and others. So how did China develop a secret space program? Boyd Bushman, who worked for Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works, says, quote, I don't want us to fall behind the Russians and Chinese. And the problem I have is that Area 51 is working with both the Russians and Chinese right now, trying to make UFOs. So he said that back in 2017. And the thing is, he learned about this when he was working at Lockheed Martin. And this began in the 1980s and the 90s. In the 1980s and 90s, China and Russia began working with the US Air Force and Navy out of Area 51 facilities, working on reverse engineering some of the UFOs that they had gotten their hands on. So I discuss all of this in the book, Rise of the Red Dragon, the new book that's coming out. And that's where I go into great detail into China's secret space program and how it has developed these kinds of technologies that the Navy patents are telling us about now. That the Navy developed these technologies in the 70s and the 80s. China learned about this through industrial espionage and has been developing it recently in the last 2 decades. And this is why the Navy is white-worlding these technologies, because there's no national security reason to keep these technologies secret anymore. So in a way, China, through its own kind of like industrial espionage and reverse engineering of these US secret space program technologies has accelerated the disclosure the disclosure process. So this takes us now to the third Navy patent, which is published in 2017, and that's generating gravity waves for propulsion. So again, it's here's the patent number. The inventor was Salvador Payés. Here you have assigned to the Navy. It tells you the application was filed in February 2017. It was assigned to the Department of the Navy, and it was published in 2018 in August, and then it was granted in June of 2019. So this is a device for generating gravity waves for propulsion. So here's what the abstract says. So I'll read that out. A high-frequency gravitational wave generator, including a gas-filled shell with an outer shell surface, microwave emitters, sound generators, and acoustic vibration resonant gas-filled cavities. So it's telling us about the kind of internal mechanisms of the craft. So, you know, this is how the craft looks. And so you have a cavity, an outer shell, and an inner shell. And inside it, you have these acoustic devices. So basically, it's telling us that inside of this outer shell and the inner shell, you have electromagnetic fields being pulsed. It's like a microwave cavity. So here you have like the microwave emitters, here 400, here 400, the microwave emitters that is emitting microwaves around the outer shell. Just as in the hybrid aircraft craft, you had the same principle. So you have the shell, outer shell, inner shell, and so you have a cavity, and so you have the pulsing of microwaves developing an electromagnetic field. And also you have this acoustic device that's also generating an electromagnetic field. So I'll go back to the abstract, and it tells us the outer shell surface is electrically charged and vibrated by the microwave emitters to generate a first electromagnetic field. Okay, so that's the first field. It's being generated outside of the craft. The acoustic vibration resonant gas-filled cavities each have a cavity surface that can be electrically charged and vibrated by acoustic energy from the sound generators, such that a second electromagnetic field is generated. So what that means is that internally here, you have this kind of gas-filled shell. So it's filled with the shell, and you have a sound generator. So this device is the sound generator. That's 200. That's the 200 here. So this is the sound generator. And that generates an electromagnetic field that is it's a second field. So basically what you're having here is a second electromagnetic field that is being generated by these acoustic devices using sound. So you have a sound generator here, this triangle and this triangle, a sound generator that generates a sound and also generates an electromagnetic field. And you also have an electromagnetic field being generated by these microwave emitters kind of just between the inner hull and the outer hull, or the inner shell and the outer shell of the craft. And so those two electromagnetic fields are able to generate an effect which is generating a gravitational field. So basically what you have is two electromagnetic fields, and if you pulse them and move them around in a certain way, you can generate a gravity wave. So it's like this gravity wave is something that can mean that you can have gravity changing. Or another way of looking at that is another way, some people may have heard of an Alcubierre warp drive. And that's where kind of like space in front of the craft is compressed, or space-time in front of the craft is compressed, and space-time behind the craft is expanded, which means that the craft can move very, very quickly in space-time to the location that you want. So it's kind of like a warp drive. So this is something very similar, that you're generating a gravity wave by pulsing and modulating two electromagnetic fields, one generated by a microwave device and the other generated by a sound device. So that's kind of like my layman's explanation for that. Hopefully that makes sense. But, you know, it's very significant that Salvador Pais was able to have a paper published on this, a high-frequency gravitational wave-induced propulsion, published for the Society of Automobile Engineers Technical International papers. So that was published in 2017. Of course, the patent was published in June of 2018. So that's showing that, you know, the Navy is wanting Pais to not only have these patents published through the patent system, but he's also wanting him to have scholarly papers delivered at different scientific conventions. And that's basically, so the Navy wants Pais to go forward and basically introduce white world scientists and engineers to the feasibility of these technologies. So they want scientists and engineers to learn about this because this is something that is socially or globally transformative. So the Navy wants to do this, but there are challenges in doing this, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But certainly, a lot of scientists, a lot of engineers, you know, they operate under earlier on I mentioned conservation of energy laws, and they look at this. They look at this kind of device, or maybe we go back to the earlier device. Yeah, to this device where, you know, you're talking about a hybrid aerospace underwater craft that is being generated by an electromagnetic, by a quantum bubble that is being generated in front of the craft, and that you have an electromagnetic field, a microwave wave being generated. A lot of scientists and engineers look at this and they say, well, this is impossible. How can this be done? Just as the patent examiner rejected this and said, well, you know, where's the power come from for this? How can you generate this power? A lot of scientists will look at that and say, well, there's nothing in existence that could generate the power for this kind of hybrid aerospace underwater craft. Of course, the patent examiner overturned his rejection because of these, because of the letter by Dr. James Shee from the Naval Aviation Enterprise, the Chief Technical Officer. But a lot of scientists say that, well, this stuff isn't possible. How can you do this? So this is where these scholarly papers come in. It's to really kind of like break the ice. It's really to like tell these scientists, you know, this stuff is feasible. Start looking at it. You know, kind of get out of your rigid mindset. Get out of your ideas that, you know, the kind of power sources for these kinds of electromagnetic fields being generated doesn't exist. And just like open your minds, because the power sources do exist, and I will be talking about this. So this is a part of the reason why all of this stuff is coming out and being pushed. So now we get into a fourth patent application. In 2019, this is for a room temperature superconductor. So the patent application is titled Piezoelectricity Induced High Temperature Superconductor. It was the inventor Salvador Pais, again, Department of the Navy. The patent application was filed in June of 2017. It was published in November of 2019. And application status is pending. So, and I just checked, the application status is still pending. And I will explain why that's the case. So what is a room temperature superconductor? So a room temperature superconductor is a material that is capable of exhibiting superconductivity at operating temperatures of or above 25 degrees Celsius. That's approximately 300 degrees Kelvin. So room temperature superconductivity in a manipulated current carrying special composite metal wire may be achieved. So this is in the patent application by Pais, and he's explaining how this works. And basically, a superconductor is a metal such as, say, gold, aluminium, lead, which, when the temperature is low enough, roughly, basically what happens with a superconductor in the conventional world, when you actually have a superconductor like gold, aluminium, lead, at the critical temperature, what happens is that it is able to experience zero resistance. So it doesn't lose any electrical energy in terms of heat or gravity, heat or waste. So in other words, a superconductor is a great way of being able to store electrical energy, because you're not going to have any loss because of heat and electrical resistance and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit more about the difference between a superconductor and a normal conducting metal later. So I'll go on. The current must be pulsed for maximum effect. This concept enables the transmission of electrical power without any losses and exhibits optimal thermal management, no heat dissipation, which leads to the design and development of novel energy generation and harvesting devices with enormous benefits to civilization. End quote. So what Pais is telling us here is that this room temperature superconductor can be achieved by basically manipulating electrical energy that's being moved around a particular metal or a composite metal wire in a particular way. That if you're able to manipulate the currents that are moving in there in a particular way, then you're able to influence the superconductivity of that metal, as opposed to the conventional open source scientific world. Their approach is to find metals that are that can be that are suitable superconductors when the temperature is lowered to a critical temperature, which is like maybe like minus 200 degrees centigrade, which obviously is a very hard thing to do. You have to do it in a laboratory. But and then when you do that in a facility, you can lower the temperature to like minus 200 degrees centigrade, and you can use a metal, the right metal, whatever its critical temperature is. It becomes a superconductor, so it can hold electrical energy and not lose anything to heat. But the practical implication are very limited, because 200 degrees below zero, you have to put a lot of energy into developing something like that. You have to develop, say, a facility that can lower the temperature to minus 200 degrees, and then you have the metals that are lower to that, and then that can hold the high voltages that are necessary to store energy. So that's going to be very expensive, very difficult, and very large. But what PAIS is doing is that he's saying that his superconductor, his room temperature superconductor, can operate at of or above 25 degrees Celsius. So that would mean if you're if you're needing to store energy using superconductors, say on a ship or a spacecraft, you know, on one way to do it would be to build a facility or a room that is lowered in temperature to, say, you know, minus 200 degrees, and then you have your superconductors in there, and they can hold electrical energy and not lose any electrical energy to heat and so forth. And sure, that would be one way to store a large amount of electrical energy, but because you have to heat that room or keep that room at minus 200 degrees, you're going to use a lot of power to do that. But if all you need is a room that can be heated, that has to be at like 25 degrees Celsius, you're going to save a lot of power. This is going to be really efficient. And this is like the, you know, the holy grail of superconductivity. And PAIS is saying that all you need to do is not concentrate on the metals, not concentrate on finding the critical temperature for a particular metal. You just configure metals with these wires that can be manipulated in a way so that you can experience superconductivity at 25 degrees Celsius and above, which